Welcome everyone. My name is Peter Peerdeman. I'm CTO slash technical director at Lively, which is a software development company in the western part of Amsterdam. Yeah, it's called Lively. We call ourselves architect in online, so we do concept design, business development, interaction design, development, and operations. Mostly for web applications, but also for mobile apps. And that's why I'm talking to you about React Native today. So we're basically a happy nerd club. With about 20 people now, very young, passionate people. Yeah, with a super young team and really excited about JavaScript, so that's why we're such fans of React Native as well. But first I want to give a little bit of context, maybe for everyone who's not heard that much about hybrid development. So our context is we want to deliver mobile experiences that matches our users' expectations. And expectations from users is very high nowadays. So even the smaller companies or smaller clients all compare your application and your user experience to the Facebook application and the Twitter application and the Instagram application. So you really have to perform as a developer to make sure that these expectations are met, even though the budgets are a lot smaller than in the big Instagram and Facebook applications. So this is a little bit about the context. I want to show a little bit about our story about Lively and where we came from. So we've been a company now for about 6 years, and started out with we started out basically from native to web, and we got back again. So it's sort of full circle to the hybrid approach in our application development. So we started off with a native application. Maybe just a quick show of hands. Who knows Frank watching? It's at least a couple of people. It's a big blog in the Netherlands, and we created the iOS application for it. Welcome. So this was the first native experience, but we really had to invest to make the iOS application, and we did not have an Android developer at the time. So this meant that we only launched on iOS, and we had a very nice user experience with a scrolling list in which during the scrolling you could see the scores of the blog post. So when you were skimming, you could just see what kind of blogs were coming instead of reading the full text. So it had some nice interactions in it, but it was a big hassle for us to develop because it was written not in Swift but Objective-C back at the time, and we're mostly a web company, so we program everything. Back in the day it was JavaScript and PHP, but we completely switched to JavaScript now. So this was the reason that in the next project that we did, we actually switched over to Cordova, and we had some prior experiences to Cordova, and the performance was already a lot better. So we thought we're just going to give it a try. We're going to see how far we can get. So this was the Leefplezier application, and we started developing. And actually, we found out we're not going to use Angular Ionic anymore. We're going to switch to Angular. This was the framework that we used during the past time. So the Leefplezier application was also very suitable for this because it was a sort of a diary application. So the participants in this research had to fill out a questionnaire form thrice a day for 30 days. So it was mostly filling forms, or that was what we thought it would be, and of course it exploded and need to be offline. And well, there was a lot of side functionality in it, but in the end we created it in Cordova, which is just a HTML, JavaScript, CSS application. So we had a lot of use from the Angular framework, which already gave a lot more structure, but still it was a web application. After the Leefplezier application, we went on to the Peerdeman application. Maybe anyone knows Peerdeman? It's a startup from Holland. They've been operating in the last couple of years, which is a collaboration platform on which freelancers and employees at a company can start a project, get together like swarm thinking, and then have a chat and have a sort of a Trello list, to-do list, and do a project together and then disband again. We built a web platform for them in Meteor, which is a pure JavaScript framework. So this was also the moment where we as a company completely switched from JavaScript and PHP to just JavaScript. So till this day, we still write all of our code in JavaScript, both in the front end, in the back end in Node.js, and also for mobile now in React Native, which really helps to get the teams, to get the front end and back end teams closer together. But I digress. So Peerdeman was created in Cordova, React and Meteor. So it was still a web view, a hybrid web view. And we used React as the web framework, and it's connected through Meteor with the backend. I don't know if anyone here knows Meteor framework. So the great thing about Meteor was that it opened a WebSocket connection. So you don't have a REST endpoint, but a DDP endpoint, which means that you have a WebSocket connection, and when something changed at the server, it was immediately pushed to the local device. So this meant that we could do these kind of applications with notifications and live chats fairly easily. But still, it was a web application. So as you could see in this view, the navigation was at the bottom, which is an iOS pattern of navigating, but it looked the same on Android. So we continued on. And we went to Start Dashboard, which is a similar application actually to Peerdeman. But this time we started using React Native, and it was still using a Meteor backend, so it was still using the streaming data. But this was the first time we actually created a hybrid application that would render native components on your screen instead of basically being a browser going to a local website. So actually the functionality is quite similar, and even though I did not show the Android pictures right now, we had different navigations for Android, but I'll get there in a second. Yes, and so the first real React Native app that's now also going to be widely used at the HVA, or very big organization, is the Hogeschool van Amsterdam. It's a School for Applied Sciences. That's where we really sort of elevated our power use of this framework. Where, for instance, you would have these very nice fluid screens in which you could see your grades, and you can see the schedule, so you know what courses are coming up. And actually creating this application was more of a challenge in the back end, and getting all these sources together and making sure that all the APIs were aligned and all of the people were able to deliver their data to the application. But it was another step forward in our sort of experience with React Native. Yes, thank you. And the current project that we are working that we're currently working on is Groby, which is even more of a sort of interactive application, also built completely in React Native. So, for instance, here you see on the left side you have like a timeline, Facebook timeline, your Facebook-like timeline. You can like stuff, you can comment, you can create posts, upload your media. Select the category in which you're going to post it, add video, so there's a lot more interaction in there. And this is actually sort of for us it was the real battle test, like can we actually create a full-blown application with all of these functionalities in React Native. And actually we've been very, how do you say this, not surprised, but glad that this worked out very well. All right. So that was a little bit about the history of we've seen quite some frameworks, and we're really happy with JavaScript, so that's why we stick to it, and we really believe that's the future as well. So React Native, question mark. So maybe also another show of hands. Who already knows a little bit about React? All right. And who already knows a little bit about React Native? Okay, that's good. All right. So I'll just glance over React. So these are two frameworks, both built by Facebook, and they share the same paradigm. But we'll start with the web one first. So this would be if you would be creating a web application, sort of. If you go to your banking site, you go to internet banking, then that could be a React application. So it's a JavaScript web application framework developed and maintained by Facebook, which is maybe I even missed the word developed, maintained, and used by Facebook as well. If you compare it to, for instance, with Angular, which is a Google framework, where we were in the past very glad that it was supported or maintained by Google. It was actually not used that much by Google itself. And there was a very lively community around it, and a lot of people used it. But the fact that Facebook actually uses this technology as well for their own website, they eat their own dog food, and well, they're also they have great benefits in how do you say this, improving the framework even further. So React is a component-based library, which means that you have basically everything in your screen is a separate component, and you have components within components, but everything is a small component. Instead of back in the day, you would just say, oh, this is the screen, and we would all have the state and the representation all in one screen. We have declarative views, which means that in your programming you can declare somewhere, you say this is a navigation bar, and you don't care about how that navigation bar is actually rendered. That will take place in the navigation bar component. So you have a more declarative way instead of imperatively saying in this screen I have a bar over here which is this size and contains this data. And the components themselves, they keep the internal, they keep their own internal state. So this adds a lot to the idea of single responsibility per component. So back in the day, you would create bigger screens with a lot of stuff happening on the screen, and have state all over the place, and really not know what's going on when you press a button and multiple things happen. So this is good for structure and overview, and for creating a lot of files in your code base. So maybe for the tech people, a little bit of code to get a little bit of an idea what React looks like. So we have this is all JavaScript. So we import the React library. We create a class, which in this case is like a timer component. And maybe the most important part is the render function, which will actually render the thing on the screen. This is inside a web application, so inside your browser. You could see here HTML, which is a div. It renders a number of seconds from its state, so it has internal state, and this is the way you access this state, and the closing div tags. This will actually create an HTML page. Now, basically, all of you must have seen some kind of HTML sometimes. So that's the key component here, and you can see the way that the state is being managed. It's being initialized over here, and then on every second, the state is updated. To see, yes, with this set interval. I'll not go in complete details, but just remember a little bit about the structure of this thing, because we'll get to React Native in a second. So React Native is, how do you say, this is not really a successor. It's sort of a parallel track running at Facebook, where they use the paradigm of React, so the things that we talked about briefly before, they use the same paradigm to create mobile applications. Which is great, because our team is already very fluid in React, so they had to put little effort into this transition to create a mobile app, which is great for us. So everyone can switch around, and people can join different teams and still be very productive in programming an application. All right, so we have the React paradigm. We have native components instead of web views, and this is the most important part. I want to get across to everyone very well. So when you had Cordova, you had a browser in which you would basically load a web page. And with React Native, you actually load a native application. And this application itself will actually render native components inside the view. So if you're scrolling in a list, it's actually an iOS scrolling list. It's not a web browser where you're just scrolling through a website. And this also means that you get the same experience when you're scrolling, and you get the same performance of the list, and you get all the added bonuses of all the things that the Apple developers have put in there to make sure that this list keeps scrolling smoothly, even though there's 1,000 items in there. Whereas a website with 1,000 items, well, you probably scroll through one. Is not such a happy experience. This one was a very big point for us as well, which is native navigation on iOS and Android. Everyone who's seen both an Android and an iOS app know that the navigation patterns are completely different. I have a little animation later on. We can dissect this a little bit, but this is a big part. So you're actually creating an iOS app and an Android app, but using the same code base. All right. Fourth point: render predictability. When you're rendering a website, you're sort of left over to you have no control over the browser that's being used to view your website. You have all these strange quirks now and then, so this has gotten a lot better over the days, but still there's some z-index issues and some CSS sometimes strange things that happen, and our experience is that the render predictability of a React Native app is a lot better. So when it shows correctly on your device, you know that's going to show correctly on other devices as well. And the community support is a big one for us, which means that there's a very active community. We're actually also hosting the React Native meetup sometimes at our office and sharing some of our knowledge about this. There's a lot of people really interested. I mean, the room is packed, so it's a really thing that attracts great interest. So yeah. It's a big plus. All right, so a little bit of code again, a little bit shorter this time. That's maybe not really fair, so don't make this comparison. But you see a JavaScript over here as well. So we import React, and we also import some other parts from the React Native library. We create a class Blink. It's not actually precisely the same message of the same application, but it gets the point across. There's also a render function, like we saw before. And we see that it returns a certain value, and here's where it gets interesting. Instead of a P HTML element or a div or a list or an HTML element, it actually renders a text component, and this text component is imported from the React Native library, and this will mean that when you render this application, the text that will be shown is actually a native text component containing the value of display. And display is the current state, if it's showing text or not. And if it is showing text, then it's showing the property text. And the thing that it's showing is, interesting, what text is it actually? It got the text from the property. So this depends on the outer component, what kind of property was injected to this component. So you can see that it's actually, well, it should look familiar actually. Does it look familiar? If you keep them side by side, you can actually see that it's the same components. And this is really the part where our developers have a very easy time transitioning to actually developing for mobile, but also from mobile back to our web applications, and even want to draw this a little bit bigger also to the backend. So we create all our backends in Node, and we write this in TypeScript. So these examples are JavaScript, but we write the React Native applications mostly in TypeScript as well. And this means this boundary between front-end and backend is blurring more and more. And it becomes less daunting for a front-ender to visit the back-end code, and it becomes less daunting for a back-ender to also see the front-end code, which means that we sort of create more of a team feeling to actually deliver an experience to our customers as a whole. So hybrid with benefits. Of course, there's benefits, and there's probably a couple of problems as well. Benefits is that's one code base. So you're maintaining one code base, and of course there's a lot of if statements. If Android, then maybe do something else, or splitting a certain part where you need a different plugin for Android where you need a different plugin for Apple. But a lot of these switches have already also been abstracted away by the most used components that everyone actually uses while they're developing for React Native. We have one language expertise. I've already talked a little bit about this, why that's so important for us. One big part that I wanted to stress is one QA, and I keep coming back to this, especially to people who are already having two applications with two separate developers, iOS developer and Android developer. That's great, and I agree. You will get the best possible result when you have separate developers, but this also means that you have to have two separate QA processes. And you have this problem of feature parity, so the iOS application has these features and Android application has these features, and you want to keep them in sync, but sometimes it's harder to do on one platform than on another, or there's something going on with the Android developer, so you maybe get a dip somewhere, or vice versa, of course. I see you guys smiling. It's always the Android people, but you know, you catch my drift. You catch my drift, right? But having all the business logic in JavaScript means that if there's a problem in the business logic, you have one place where you report it, and you also have one place where you solve it, and it's solved for both platforms at the same time. And this does not mean that you will not run into platform-specific bugs, and of course these need to be solved separately, but for business logic and just for rendering data and just for the logic of your application, this is great. Very rich plugin and bridge ecosystem, where back in the day with Cordova you had a lot of shitty plugins. Nowadays it's actually very well done, and the plugins that are available are also of high quality, which is a big change with before. And it seems that the people who created the better bridges in Cordova have now also switched to creating the better plugins in React Native. And you have hot code reload, so for a developer this is great when you can actually have the native application running and you change something in code, and because the application is built with JavaScript instructions, it's able to hot reload the JavaScript that loads the application. So you don't have to make a complete build of your application to see the changes inside your development environment, which is very nice. It's a very short development cycle, almost comparable to refreshing your page on a web browser. But most of all these benefits, you have the native user experience. So I've got a couple of nice animations that Leon Smit, who's the lead mobile developer at our team, created. And here you can see a React Native application. On the left side you have the Android application with the navigation on top, and when you press a detail, it will actually load a modal over the full view. And on the iOS application, you have the navigation on the bottom. And you can see that when you go to a detail, it will come in from the right side, and you're able to swipe the page back to the left side. So this is something that you will never be able to do this properly in a web application. So that's the reason why we switched away from Cordova. But it's also something that this application was still created with only JavaScript, and it has this same experience. It's pretty cool. All right, so are there any downsides? And of course there are, and please feel free to approach me afterwards, and we can have a nice discussion about this as well. One of the things that's for us a minor inconvenience, but maybe is a problem for other developers, is the SDK feature delay. So this would mean that when the WWDC event from Apple arrives and all the new features are shown, then it means that the React Native community has to build a plugin that will actually pull these new features in and expose these to the React Native framework. And yeah, if you want to have an application that on launch day of these new features immediately has these features, then maybe you're getting in a bit of a time squeeze. I have to say that these new features are picked up very rapidly. People are really on top of there. So when they're available for developers, they also work on this to get this inside React Native as soon as possible. But it is, of course, a little bit of a delay and a dependency on the team that has to build these plugins. There we go with the plugin bridge dependencies as well. You have to drag in a lot of dependencies, and some of the features are not created by the React Native team themselves, but it's just third-party plugins. And this also means that these third-party plugins have to be updated by third parties, which is more dependencies on different developers. But in our experience, this has not really been a problem so far, because the plugins are already of high enough quality that we can use them inside our production apps with no problem. You have a single JavaScript thread, so you're not able to do multi-threading as you could do in the native applications. And for specific problems, for a specific application, this would maybe present some challenges. But of course, you can still, and I will get to that later, you can also include parts of your application as a React Native application, and then still have multi-threading stuff running on the background. So, but in essence, it runs on a single thread. Then we go into the patents and sort of uncertainty about the licenses. So the React license for the React framework has actually been opened a lot more now. But for React Native, this is still actually kind of drawing a blank on what the current license is. But this is something that Facebook still has control over. So some people, or maybe some conspiracy theorists, are thinking like there's going to be a day that they're going to pull the plug on Hybrid or on React Native, and we're going to make people pay for this or something. And of course, this is a possibility, but it's one we're willing to take because it does not weigh against the benefits that we get. And when you create very specific custom behaviors, we had a talk at our meetup last time about someone who wanted to do Instagram-like application with thumbnails. And when you clicked on a thumbnail, it wanted to increase the size and go to the detail page or something, like a very special transition from one page to the next one. And he actually, this guy that was presenting at our meetup, actually found a way to do this in React Native. But if you want to do these kind of very special app interactions, then maybe you need to work around this in React Native or do this part in the native code. Then it also means that you need to do it twice for Android and iOS. So it's your own choice then. So maybe some questions already. Some questions arise. One that I get a lot: does the experience actually compare to two native apps? Well, we can get into a subjective discussion here, but I think it does actually, and it's it's leaps and bounds ahead of what we've been able to do before with other sort of similar native libraries, such as what was it called, Accelerator. It does a similar thing, but it's also was not the same quality. So this. For me, you can create a lot worse apps in. You can also create very bad apps in native code as well. So another one: don't you bump into boundaries constantly because of these limitations? And our sort of answer to this is we don't mind designing within the boundaries. So our designers know very well about this whole trade-off about building for Android and building for iOS, and having to design for both platforms, and the design choices there. And once these boundaries are clear, and we have a very open line between design and development, and there's a lot of going back and forth, like, is there actually something that we could create for this, or how is this very difficult, or what are the alternatives to do this? And when we stay inside these boundaries, we have very little problem actually creating the application so far. So. And one that I've heard also is, I've already got two native apps, so what do I do now? Well, there's a great solution for that as well. You just integrate React Native inside your existing application. And there's very good documentation on the React framework on how you could, for instance, stay developing for two separate platforms, but then have the settings menu or something. At least do the settings menu in React Native, so you only have to write it once, and integrate it for both platforms. So you have one code base for certain parts of your application, and that you don't need to worry about this double QA and this double feature parity and this kind of thing. So that's it's a very worthwhile option to explore as well, and they really put a lot of effort into getting people on board in this kind of way. And then the hamvraag, is it for me? And which I'm happy to reply, yes. So you have the quick multi-platform development. There you go. Small intersection. But I would be, really interested to hear some questions and some discussions maybe in the back.
Yeah, one detail on JavaScript and not being able to run them in parallel. You can have a full Node.js in the background and communicate with it. It's supported on iOS and Android, so that problem is also solved.
All right. So the remark is that if you want to do the multi-threading, you can actually have a node process in the back of your React Native application. It's running Node.js inside the application.
Full Node.js on iOS and Android.
Yeah. So you can do the. Yeah, but Node.js runs in a single thread as well, right?
But it's a separate process on the device.
Okay. So you can spawn multiple of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So. So inside the React Native application, you can have multiple threads of Node.js actually processing, multiple processes running. Okay, so that solves part of that solves the problem as well. Yeah.
What would that do with battery life?
So the question is, what would running parallel programming do with your battery life?
Multiple Node.js processes in the background. You're going to use extra power from
Yeah.
your battery. What does that do for battery life
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah, it does the same thing it would do. It does the same thing it would do for a native application. So if you run multiple cores at the same time, it's going to require more energy and drain your battery faster. Yeah, but the problem that we're talking about right now is like very specific. If you need this actually, like is it possible? But yeah, of course, we don't really need it in the kind of applications that we're creating. So we're just sticking to a single thread and keeping our batteries happy. Yeah. Yes?
So you are making it sound as if React Native is still way to go, and to challenge it. When do you think React Native is not the right solution?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
If you don't want to use React,
Yeah.
if you want to use something different, use NativeScript, for instance.
Yeah.
You can use TypeScript, JavaScript, Solo.js.
We're not talking about the theology behind the
Yeah.
technical and feature-wise.
Yeah.
When would you not use React Native?
All right, that's a good question. So the question is, when would you not reuse React Native? And I think that at a certain scale or a certain level of maturity of your development teams, I would say that when you have separate teams that are fully optimized in creating the native Android experience and the native iOS experience, and both teams are fully in sync with the development cycle or the feature cycle of Google and Apple, I think you will be even quicker into integrating these features, and you will have sort of even more seamless experience in delivering this to your customers. But in my point of view, you would already need very heavy teams to be able to support this. So I think that would be the case, that if you have two completely well-oiled teams both running your apps, and you have the money to spare, you have the revenue to actually make this real high quality, even higher quality work, then maybe it would make more sense. But still, also in these, I would suggest that using parts in React Native would make a lot of sense to quickly and rapidly prototype stuff as well, for instance. Yeah, there's someone who wants to make a remark about this in the back.
If you do game development,
Okay.
I would say,
Yeah.
for game development, I'd say no React Native.
Yeah.
Or
No hybrid at all,
No.
actually. No JavaScript at all.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But one remark on the separate teams. From experience, I know you have to make sure that they communicate with each other. Because otherwise you have an iOS application that goes right, and an Android application goes left.
make it one team.
Yeah, make it one integrated
Sounds good.
team,
Yeah. So the remark is that if the communication between the iOS team and the Android team is very well, then and it feels like one team, then and you're able to make this one team, then it would maybe make more sense to do it natively separately. You mean?
I have a question. What about security? compare it to native?
That's a good
Is
question.
there a reason
Yeah.
not to use?
Sorry?
Might it be a reason not to use?
Yes, maybe. Yeah. So this also.
I'm from a bank.
Yeah, the question the question is, what about security for React Native versus actually native development? And I would say this draws back a little bit from the idea of having a lot of dependencies and having third-party plugins. So this would mean that if you would be using a third-party plugin from someone who's just on GitHub and saying, oh, I'm going to make a nice plugin so you can actually use this, you have this little nudge on the top of an Apple device, and I want to make a unicorn fly over there or something, then someone on the web will write this plugin with the native iOS code, doing the little doing the fluffy unicorn in the top right spot. That's not even possible inside React Native yet, and he will create this application. But then you're dependent on that person's code. So this could mean that this person could do something inside these dependencies. So I can sort of relate.
That
I can.
will not be very appreciated by our risk.
Yeah. I can really relate to this. I worked on an internet banking project as well, which was a web project. And what happened over there was that all of the dependencies were actually audited and were checked by security to see if there's no crazy things in there. And from this point of view, this is also one of the kind of teams that already have two separate teams and already have like this separate iOS and Android teams. Still, I would say that when, for instance, using I've seen for instance the ING app, when you go to the menu and you go to leave your feedback, that's also just a web view with a website in it, and it's also probably written in Angular with plugins that will of course be checked and be audited. So for that part, for me, it would make a lot more sense to use React Native there and try to stick with the base component, sort of easier to check or easier to verify for the compliance or security team as well. Yeah. So maybe it's a bit long explanation, but from a security point of view, I would not see why a React Native app should be less secure than a native app, because
Well,
it doesn't have to be.
On others.
Yeah.
It's a lot of NPM
Yeah.
packages,
Yeah.
hundreds.
Yeah. So a lot of NPM packages to depend on. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Any other questions? Discussion points? People who are completely against this or for this? Who is going to use try React Native, or tell it to the development? That's good. It's nice to give a little bit of sort of an update on where we are with the hybrid approach. And if you're ever having a question or interested about this, or want to know more or see more of our portfolio, then please give me a call. You can always just email me, peter@lively.nl. It's very easy one, or on Twitter. And I'll be happy to come by and tell you everything about how it would fit for you as well. All right, thanks so much. Nice.